Hi, everybody. I'm Scott, the writer and director of Skin on Skin, the rise and fall of the world's largest furrier. Great to see you again. Today, I am with one of the participants in the film and one of its producers, Larry Becker. Good afternoon. Hello.
Hi there. How are you?
Great, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Great.
I'm anxious to talk.
Cool. All right, well, let's start talking. And why don't you tell us first, since you've seen the film and a lot of people who are watching maybe even haven't, what you thought of the film?
It wasn't exactly what I expected. I remember when we first spoke about, when you told me that you were producing this film, and myself, who really wants to see this? I mean, it's a film about the fur industry and Evans, and I thought, well, I tell you what, after seeing it, it's all about family. And everybody that's going to tune into this has one. And, they're going to recognize that there's something here and associate. I don't know if it's my Uncle Charlie or if it's, down the street or whatever. And but it's family.
Who doesn't love a rags to riches story? But a rags to riches to collapse story?
There were two Evans furs. The one that climbed to the top of the highest peak, amazing story, and the one that tumbled from that peak decades later. But that's not the tragedy. The tragedy is what happened in between.
They lived the American dream, and they let a lot of people come in and live it with them. And it was a wonderful story until it wasn't.
Coming from a generation that was so driven and willing to work 18 hours a day to be successful, there aren't that many people like that anymore.
They created something out of whole cloth, and he helped kings and queens around the world with their fur coats.
That was the era, I would say, the golden era of department stores and specialty stores.
Genetics loads the gun, but it's the environment that pulls the trigger.
Non-existent parenting, and so they didn't learn how to cope with stresses.
And I just look at the damage that my father created and the things that he has said.
But it certainly caused a significant rift in the family and families, and a number of us didn't communicate with each other for a long time.
You marry into the family, you marry into the business, because that is your life.
Clearly, there were problems.
And I know, knowing you, this was not an easy story to tell because very close to home. And again, like I say, I've been expecting this still. This is a health and wealth. This is a film about everybody can tune into it. Everybody could feel something and take something away from it.
One of the interesting things is that it didn't start that way. It originally was going to be about Evans Furs and the rise and fall of the business, which I thought in and of itself was an interesting story. That 70-year arc, we have the business going to the top of the peak and then crashing.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, that's a great story, the rise and fall. That's a good story. People want to hear that.
But it's just like you said, the more you talk to people, the more it became about the people and their stories, and that's what emerged. And it took over as a life of its own, really.
We ended up going from a hands-on, management position to being, looking at a book and looking at reports without looking at, the fur itself. So I think that became our biggest demise. Well, I got to tell you, I mean, so the direction that you took, to imagine, like, what's the reaction from your family?
Oh boy. Well, not a thing. Nobody said, I love it, I hate it, you've mischaracterized things, you're speaking out of turn, or you're sharing secrets we wish you hadn't have shared, because they all said it live on tape.
Well, I got to imagine that there are stories that you did not bring to the table.
It's not that I didn't bring them to the table. There are a lot of, there's 100 hours of tape here we're trying to distill into 4 hours. And so there are a lot of stories that just won't make it in the film. But, I would tell them all if they were appropriate or fit in the essence of the film.
I won't say that was the demise of the company, but it certainly caused a significant rift in the family and families, and a number of us didn't communicate with each other for a long time.
Here, I'll give you an example. Let me think of one for a second. Here's a funny one. You're like, now this won't make it in the film, probably, because it's more about me and not about anything. But when I went out to take your job in L.A., after you went from L.A. to where? To Hong Kong, or back to New York or Chicago? Or where you
went from L.A. to Chicago.
Okay. So they send me out to L.A. to replace you as the assistant. Okay. And then I did that for a couple of years. And then I went to San Francisco, and then they brought me back to replace your and my mentor, who we both loved. And I really feel shitty about having partaken in that now all these years later. But Craig O'Malley and I were flying out here with who was going to be, because Craig was my divisional prior, and we were flying out with who was going to be my new divisional, Bob McGrath, if you remember him.
It's pretty much like the story of the rise and fall.
Yeah.
Yeah, you definitely remember people that slid.
Well, yeah, you were right. You remember the great people, and you remember the really awful things that happen, and it's just the normal things you kind of get foggy on. But anyways, so we're flying to L.A. to have me take over that position that I was the assistant at before, as were you. And Craig and I are in the bathroom talking at the airport, and I'm like, God, I can't believe I'm going to be working for Bob McGrath. I fucking hate him. Toilet flushed, the door to the bathroom opens, and out on him by McGrath.
Was he washing his hands or no?
I don't recall, but just the fact that in typical Bob McGrath fashion, the slimy guy happened to be there. The one place we thought we could get somewhere and talk about him.
Well, I'm going to tell you something. This is really going to be interesting and fun. But you know who my mentor was? Freddie Handel. He was the guy that pushed me. So I had bruises on my back from like 18 to 20. Pushed me so hard. And I remember going into a bathroom. We were at we're having lunch with David and Sam Garber. They were discussing me moving to Hong Kong. And we were in the bathroom. Oh, I said, I got to go to the bathroom. Freddie goes, I'll join. And there were two things that were really funny. This man, I just wanted to let you know, you order the most expensive thing on the menu. I said, okay, I'll do. Well, all of a sudden, here I am, this, young kid, and they're stepping me up to royal. Anyway, we walk into the bathroom. Freddie goes, I'm going to go to the bathroom too. We walk into the first thing he did, look under the stall. And I said, what are you doing? And he says, for that nobody thinks. And he shared some interesting conversation about how to proceed.
But it also says something about some of the machinations of the competitions that were going on in middle management, and upper middle management. Here, I'll give you another one that definitely won't make it into the film. When we bought, I think it was in the 80s-ish, we bought Black Diamond from the guy who owned it, Ollie Gintel. Okay, so we buy Black Diamond for quite a bit of money. It was 10 million, 20 million. I don't remember what it was, but it was a lot of money for,
Well, we had a lot of other people's money.
yeah. And it was a very prestigious label. But anyways, I remember shortly after the sale closed, being at a breakfast in New York in the market with my grandfather and David. I don't remember if Robert was there, and a handful of other people. Barry was probably there. And just celebrating the thing with Ollie Gintel because it was a good deal for both people at both sides at the time. So the bill comes for this breakfast. You know, what's the bill for 5 or 8, 7 or 8 people? You know, $30, $40 at the time. And Ollie Gintel grabs the bill and he goes, "Who had the toast?" and he's, you know, like everybody's gonna pay their part. Wait a second.
Had the check cashed yet?
Oh yeah, I don't know. Certainly would think the guy that you just gave 20 million to would treat, but in rare form, you know, these guys were all from the Depression generation and they lived a different style of life.
In 1986, 87, when I was out here in Columbus, and the business was booming. We were, it was very hot, all over, even in the U.S. Right? There were TV ads, there were newspaper ads, there were magazine ads, there were articles, there were, everybody was wearing fur coats. It was hot.
So tell me a little bit about after you did your initial interview with me for the film, how you felt about it, and subsequently leading into a little bit about your history with Jeff and your uncle, his father, and then how that all transpired.
You know what? Yeah, I wasn't expecting film Emily, and having watched opened up a lot of doors and windows, closets that I had closed for a lot of years. And you know Jeff, my cousin, you know, definitely we grew up together. And somehow, some way, because of the actions of both myself and his dad, we just lost touch. I wanted no part, no contact with family. And having watched the film, and
You got it perfectly with the Meltzers.
that's what I'm saying. No, Scott, you got to understand. Having watched and felt the film, you really opened up. You opened up a passage that I wasn't able to find, and that was, I love this. What do I have against him? It wasn't him, and it was because of family and the way that family sometimes. Well, you brought it out. Sometimes treats family like shit. And again, what you're doing is exactly what I felt I was doing. I wasn't let anybody get away with it.
And my father was ballistic and started to look closer at everything. And did not like what he saw. And he wiped his hands. He said, "We're done. You treated family like shit. And you treat shit like family."
And I basically contact with the only cousin he has a sister. The only cousin that I actually have his family that it's family. I mean, my take on family is it's unconditional. It really and truly, dogs do it.
And I was hoping some of that would come out with some of my family too, because again, we skim the surface of it in the first film. We'll get into it a little more in the second and third. But there are people in my family who still aren't speaking to each other for 25 or 30 years over things that happened some time ago, or recurring things that continue to happen, because just as you said, they're unwilling to just let it go at this point and go back to family's unconditional. And I think that's one of the things you saw in the film was that these 6 Meltzer kids were really damaged each in their own way, but they're always there for each other, and they're always lifting each other up when they had to, and they're always going through the crises as well as the successes together.
I'll tell you that the family member. I mean, again, I never met AL. I loved that company so much that I would have loved AL, sure, because he was the inspiration. I'm pretty sure that Herman would have been the guy I would have connected. That man seemed to be, I don't know, he had a,
Well, my grandmother used to say that in another life he would have been an artist. That that his merchandising talent was such that he could really look at something and tell what would sell. And especially as fashion is in fur fashion evolved and rotated and whatnot, he really knew in February what was going to sell in December.
well, think about it. He had probably the most integral position or positioning of being in New York.
Second child Herman suffered a long, slow decline. After a successful career supporting brother A.L. in the startup and running of Evans Furs in its first 30 years, he retired to his home in Westport, Connecticut around the time the company went public. From there, possibly from the loss of his identity combined with the long-term effects of being abandoned by his parents, Herman went into a slow-simmering depression that would infect the rest of his life.
At the epicenter of fashion and selection. I mean, that was, for me, I loved being in Chicago. I loved meetings. I loved those lunches. And I did get to select the most expensive things on the menus. They weren't always the best.
There are some people who didn't want to talk, and there are, which I wish they would have. But I understand, like I said, some people were devastated by what happened. And then another reason why I wanted to get all this memorialized is there were some people who wanted to talk, and I didn't get to in time. Like, case in point, somebody you and I both know is one of the most lovely, wonderful, and fun people, in the history of the market was Donald Springer, who, his dad was, the biggest sable genius in the world for many, many years. But,
But Donald was probably the biggest marketing.
correct.
Ads say, but I was partners with them in a business.
Oh, really?
I lived in Hong Kong. We started a business called It's a Whole New Ballgame. And what it was, he had a friend through his country club. See, he made it. You know what I mean? He should only rest in peace, but I'm pretty sure he's on the 18th hole right now. You know what I mean? He enjoyed his life and he made it. He meets this guy on the golf course that has a license for the NFL. Here I am in Hong Kong, just itching to, find, I was a sorcerer, so that was my thing. And we were friends. We used to drive, when I lived in New York, when I was the VP in New York, and the director of the New York office, used to drive to work together every day. It took me about 2 hours longer. But I enjoyed the ride, and especially the ride home. That's a whole different story.
So anyway, so he was going to partake in the thing, and he was, he'd been ill. I'd been speaking to him the whole time he was ill. And literally 3 days before we were supposed to tape the interview, he passed away. So I want this story memorialized because
That's why you have to capture it, So, I mean, we're at the stage now where you're a storyteller. Let's not lose sight of that. You have to tell these stories.
Hi, welcome. I'm Scott, and my being able to share the following true story with you is something I've wanted to do for over 20 years, since 2004. Partially, as you'll see, I wasn't prepared emotionally, nor was I armed with enough evidence and understanding to be able to tell you the story properly and in its entirety. Well, you know what I love about it is we're not retelling something that's been told 1,000 times. Nobody's really told the story in the 25.
This is nonfiction.
Yeah,
This is for real.
yep. There's so many aspects of it, from the business to all the things that went on in my family and the tragedies that stemmed from my great-grandparents. And there's just so many layers that people keep telling me they find themselves in, or that they're in tears by the time the thing is over. It's not the happiest of films, but it's extremely introspective.
Well, I think what it does, again, it's not, that's why I say I don't know that I could have told this story easily as you have been able to roll it out. You know what I mean? It's a difficult story to tell because look, we all spent a good part of working career. I'm one of the people that, I mean, honestly, I will raise a flag. I loved David. I loved Robert. At the end of the day, they treated me well better than could have ever, you know.
So, Coach, what did you find about, how did you feel about seeing the contrast about how you and frankly most of the other employed people who were employees felt about my family versus what you saw, the introspection from the family members?
Yeah, the story is family. It's not Evan. So the depth of the family existence within Evans, and that's the story that really, I know the rest.
Well, how about families, like including yourself, including the Leitzes, including the O'Malley, like there were so many legacy employees.
See, Evans created. And again, see, I keep saying, I never met Al. I'm sure I would have respected him. I never had the opportunity. David, I respected, I revered. He made himself. You know what I mean? He really and truly, I got to give him credit. I also saw him as being a real person and a warm. Now, again, I'm not sure that happened with the pillars in your family. Not only am I not, I'm positive. You know, I keep thinking your grandfather was probably the most cheerful person ever. In my 16 years of tenure in Athens, I always remember Harold as having smile and having, I think, is it Michael Idlis, your buddy that you grew up with, when he talks about the story about the manicure?
It's 1989, and I'm a groomsman in Scott Hunter's wedding in San Francisco. So I said to myself, Seth, let me go downstairs and get myself a manicure and, be all fancy for my brother's wedding. So I go in, I sit down, and who walks in? Harold Sussman himself. And I'm like, oh, this is heavy, man. Me and Harold getting the manicure together. I love it. So he sits down and he goes, short and round. And I was like, what does that mean? And he was like, son, when you get a manicure, you want your nails to be short and round. If you're doing your toes, you go straight across.
It was Harold. Was the most polished guy. I didn't realize that he had the kind of background he had. So he was destined to be polished. But why did David, that's what David looked like David probably.
Yeah, but I'll give you before you even finish the question. He wanted that generation gone and done with and retired. And my grandfather didn't want to leave. And my grandfather also wasn't totally supportive of everything David wanted to do, some of which was extreme. And, he just wanted it was his time and he wanted his thing. And so they ended up clashing over it several times, again, out of sight of everybody. So I knew all about it. What you would see would be joyful, cheerful Harold, because you know what? They spent he joined in the late 30s. The company started in 29. He joined in the late 30s after my grandmother. So he spent, 30, 40 years of nothing but a climb. They didn't really know from tough times, unlike, much of the economy or other business.
None of them did until
But that, to me, that explains it as, they had a reason to be joyful because there was a good run for 30, 40 years.
Oh, no doubt. A lot of people literally died the Evans family. They really did. I was wonderful. And then again, I was also somebody that I mean, in as much as they treated me, human being, didn't always treat my dad, certainly not at the end. My dad was the biggest supporter of Evan for as long as so again, there's so many stories.
So here, I'll tell you a story. That's a story that's going to get told in the third part, which is, as I said, the story of all the legacy people. But then there's also, and this, we've got to really explore, there's the story of all the legacy people's parents or aunts and uncles, like your father, like Al Leeds, like Phil Morgan, who that were let go, and then the offspring stayed.
A man walks up to me and just kind of gives me a few questions that were kind of odd. Turns out it was David Meltzer. And I said, "Do you know who I am?" He said, "You're Mike Lerman's son." And I kind of gave a little pushback for that. And he goes, "No, you're Phil Morgan's son." And there's the name. My last name's Morgenstern, but my dad was Mike Morgan. And I said, "Correct." He goes, "You learned one thing," or something to that effect. He said, "Don't make the same mistakes your father made."
So to me, it was just, that's an interesting thing also. Again, that now we're legacy people, and then the trials and tribulations of them and their family within the company, And, Al Leach was fired. Ken Morgenstern's father was fired. Your dad was, there's an interesting thing, too, about Evans in a lot of ways. Nobody exits.
Wait a second. You're just reminded me. They treated those guys like family.
Yeah, right, right. And that's how they ended up. So, but it's interesting that, that all those stories just existed on this other outer plane. And that's, again, goes back to why this became a story about people and not a story about an empire. And just, again, more layers of an onion of how it allows whoever's watching or listening to the thing to see bits and pieces of themselves and their families in it, don't you think?
Yeah. That excites me. Believe me. Every time I watch and I see my dad, it warms the cockles of my you're warm.
No, that's awesome. That's one of the things that made it special, more than just a family-run business by this family. There are a lot of other families in there. Max, Rosenblatt. I mean, there's just so many. Every time you think about it, there's more and more. Tell me what goes through your mind when I just throw at you that in the next part we dive heavily into the downfall and the whole anti-fur thing, and some of what you were insulated from because you were in the Far East.
Julius and Rose Meltzer went forward with the belief that their son's death was an accident, and this setback rocked the family during a time when brother A.L. and Herman's Evans Furs was skyrocketing to the top of the industry.
Those Meltzer kids obviously weren't taught how to cope or how to parent or relationship skills were really lacking, and that got passed down.
DNA really plays a role in anyone's well-being.
All I know is that he had a photographic memory, he was brilliant, and the family loved him.
So she was always like, I was her little doll. But she was very interesting and fun and vivacious.
All of his grandchildren wrote reports on Nuremberg at some point in school. Someone would always have an assignment, interview some relative about something.
Nonchalantly would toss a question out, and the beads of sweat were pouring off as he's trying to answer Uncle Bernie's question.
A lot of people live in fear that, oh my God, is that going to happen to me?
In the end, a lot of people got hurt. A lot of customers got hurt because their coats weren't there. And, it was just a bad thing.
Not for nothing, we were supposed to be life. You know what I mean? We were following, that suit.
I'll never forget it. He threw this dinosaur, toy dinosaur on the table, and he says, "This is what Evans is." And you know what happened to these dinosaurs?
That wasn't what the legacy that he wanted for himself.
He didn't want to wake up and smell the coffee, so he just, he did the things that he enjoyed doing.
There you go. All righty. Larry Becker is in Port St. Lucie. He's also one of the one of the regular participants you'll see in the 3 films, Skin on Skin, The Rise and Fall of the World's Largest Furrier. I'm Scott Hunter. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day, everybody.
On the next episode of the Companion Podcast, in support of the film Skin on Skin, The Rise and Fall of the World's Largest Furrier.
When I was accepted to go to Manhattan and be involved with a modeling agency, I got scared. And I said to my dad, "I don't think I can do this. I'll stay home." Manhattan was tough. New York is a tough ball game for models. Then one day, I was also asked to do one of Evans' commercials.
Marnie, you missed it.
I did everything from fashion shows to hand modeling to commercials. It's such a historical part of what has happened in America. So I think that alone makes it so interesting and so historical. And then all the other different layers make it even more interesting.
On the next episode of the Companion Podcast, in support of the film Skin on Skin, The Rise and Fall of the World's Largest Furrier.